St. Paul had his Damascus moment. St. Mary of Egypt had her church door moment. And St. Longinus had his piercing the side of Christ with a lance moment. Today, we mark the 501st year anniversary of St. Ignatius of Loyola's Cannonball moment. We will take our text from the life of St. Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, Volume 1, by the Jesuit Father F. Francesco Mariani. Ignatius, to whose fidelity and courage the place had been entrusted by Manrico, strongly opposed all schemes of surrender, promising them speedy succors, and using every effort of persuasion and reproof to dissuade them from this design. But seeing that all his attempts were useless, with his face enkindled with anger, and detesting their cowardice, he retired to the fortress, firmly resolved to hold it to the last extremity, assisted by the few who remained within it. One only followed his example, whilst the rest valued their own safety beyond any other consideration. In the fortress, a secret council was again held on the state of affairs, and the constable and other officials, especially the more aged, were in favor of a retreat, which was again hotly opposed by Ignatius, and the proposition fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the French troops entered the city without opposition, planted their artillery against the fortress, and summoned the constable to a parley that he might surrender the place. He accordingly went forth accompanied by 3 others, Ignatius being one of the number, but seeing that the enemy, confident in their good fortune and relying on the difficulties of the garrison, exacted the most painful conditions, he so forcibly dissuaded his companions from accepting them that it was determined by all to defend the fortress to the last extremity. I must not omit to notice in place an anecdote which has been related by Ignatius himself. He was anxious under these perilous circumstances to prepare himself as the best he could to appear in the presence of God, and being unable to procure the services of a priest, he made confession of his sins to one of his comrades. Although this was confession which had no sacramental virtue, nevertheless, in past times it used to be practiced by some pious persons, and since it is in an act of great humility, the God of mercy might give to those who so confessed the gift of perfect contrition for the salvation of their souls. The proposed treaty having failed, the French, without further delay, began to batter down the walls, and a breach having been effected, advanced to the assault. The Spaniards made a brave defense, stimulated by the words and example of Ignatius, who was performing prodigies of valor in protecting a bulwark which the enemy were attempting to escalade. Whilst thus engaged, a fragment torn from the wall by a cannon shot wounded him on the left leg, whilst the shot itself rebounding from the wall fractured the right leg so that he fell down almost in a dying state. The courage of his comrades fell with their leader, and the fortress was immediately surrendered on the 20th of May, 1521. In order that this event, which God made use of for the sanctification of Ignatius to the unspeakable good of his church, might be held in perpetual remembrance, a chapel has been erected to the memory of the saint on the spot, and therein this history is inscribed in letters of gold. On the vigil of the holy apostles St. Peter and St. Paul, the physicians pronounced in the evening that if no sign of improvement manifested itself before midnight, they should give him up for lost. And in truth, during that night, the apostle St. Peter appeared to him in his sleep and gave him back his health. From that hour his pains began to abate, and his digestion to gain vigor, so that he was shortly after declared to be out of danger. This great favor which he obtained from the apostle shows, as we just now observed, how great had been the devotion of Ignatius towards him, and it is still more evident what care he had for the life of one whom he foresaw would prove so powerful support and so great an extender of the church. For the fact of this appearance we have the testimony of the saint himself, as well as that of many distinguished writers. Among the many revelations which St. Ignatius made from heaven to Giulio Mancinelli, he appeared once to him on the 28th of June, 1602, and commanded him always to hold that day in reverence, because it was most dear to him as a memorial of his own conversion, since upon that day St. Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, had appeared to him when he was sick. When he had recovered the use of his limbs, but not so entirely as to be able to walk and support himself with ease, whilst the physicians continued perfecting the bodily cure, God, in marvelous manner, commenced the cure of his soul. During the time that he was confined to his bed, wearied with his long period of inaction, he asked for some book of chivalry, a subject in which he took great delight. But by the merciful order of God's providence, no such book was to be found, and therefore two others on far higher subjects were brought to him instead, one of which contained the life of Christ, the other the lives of the saints, and both were written in the Castilian tongue. So great is the virtue of holy books that this reading wrought upon the mind of Ignatius more powerfully than the immediate prospect of death, or the vision of St. Peter, or the gift of health which he had received from him. For having begun to run over the books for his entertainment, by degrees he was interested by the marvelous things which they treated of, and filled with a desire of imitating such examples, so that from time to time he paused and said within himself, "And suppose that I should do what St. Dominic did, and what St. Francis did. St. Dominic did this, and St. Francis accomplished that. Therefore, with God's grace, I can do as much." In like manner, he went on proposing himself other arduous and difficult undertakings, and whatever they were, it seemed to him that his courage could never fail him. So, what's your cannonball moment? Not everyone has one, but if you have, feel free to let us know in the comment section. And if you know someone who's yet to have a conversion to the true faith, pray and then share this video with them.